Very excited to be welcoming her to our community here of Chiefs of Staff. Larissa and I got connected actually because I was taking a look at Joyn, and it's another great tool that Chiefs of Staff should definitely take a look at and check out if it's something that you're looking at, and especially when it comes to prioritization. Larissa is a former Chief of Staff herself, so she has definitely been in your shoes. She understands this position very well, and today she is going to be talking about prioritization and specifically a prioritization matrix that she used during her time as a Chief of Staff and how she's translated it into her now co-founder position today. So without any further ado, I'd love to give a warm round of applause to Larissa. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we're so excited to hear from you.
Cool. Well, I'm excited to be here. Chiefs of staff are my favorite people. I always say I feel like the chief of staff role has prepared me the best for being a CEO now. And truly, the experience as a chief of staff is why we started the company. And the prioritization matrix was actually like one of the aha moments of understanding how I was spending my time. But some context on what like led me to a chief of staff, because I actually always think it's like really fascinating how many like different paths there are to the chief of staff and how it's like just not one path but many. But I think one thing that was always like very consistent in my life, I was always the person thrown into the chaos to fix things. So I think operations is like a very common through line in my life. But I actually used to be a tattoo artist. But even when I was a tattoo artist, I ended up starting running the tattoo parlor. So suddenly I managed the operations of like where are we ordering colors, how are we doing the schedule. So I was like sort of the chief of staff to the tattoo parlor unintentionally. But I transitioned into technology over 13 years ago, initially more in customer facing roles, sales, account management, moved into product and engineering. And then finally was in the chief of staff role. And really the intention of that role was, yo, we're really struggling. We need to get our house in order operationally. You're known to just fix stuff. So can you just like do this for us as a company? And I was like, what is a chief of staff? I don't know, but I shall give it a shot. And I think in that role, really, I realized how one, business critical it is, because it literally, the knowledge of the chief of staff informs the executive team on nearly every single decision that they're making, where we're prioritizing, deprioritizing, investing, divesting, really getting ahead of blockers before they become problems. So it's such a business critical role, but I also found myself in this place of just like way too many things going on and not really having the right tools to support me. And again, that's really what led me to founding the company we're running now. I'm not going to spend time really on talking about Joyn because it's not a sales pitch, but I will send a blurb after and you can do like your own research. But I'm really excited to talk about the prioritization matrix. And my motivation of using it really was, I think nobody really knew what I was doing or how much work actually went into what I was doing. And I think I constantly found myself also kind of talking to the executive team on how I'm getting bogged down in things that didn't really matter versus the things that actually mattered to me and the business and what I enjoy. But I really didn't have a good way to create that visibility for myself or for the executive team to really create that visibility for them and that understanding for them. So that's really where this like prioritization matrix helped me. So I'm excited to jump into the prioritization matrix. And I'll give you like an overview of like what it is on a high level and how I've used it. I actually filled it out for myself in my current role. I'm fundraising right now, so I'm spending a lot of time on things I don't want to do. But it's part of the CEO role now. It's actually funny to be on the opposite side of like how I've helped people fundraise. And I'm running the process myself. And actually like, oh my God, maybe I need a chief of staff right now. But I filled it out for myself to give you all some context, talk a little bit about how I've then used it with my executives. And we actually rolled it out to nearly every single operator at the company. And even like product managers started using it. So like really individuals use it. You can use it for work. I've also had somebody that started using it in their relationship around like tasks around the house with her husband, because there was a little bit of like an imbalance there. So, you know, there's a lot of interesting ways to apply this matrix, but I'm going to throw it up on the screen. And obviously whenever like you have a question, just raise your hand. We'll also spend some time on you actually getting started on your matrix and then leave some room at the end to chat about takeaways and Q&A. But I'm gonna throw up the matrix now. Cool. So first I'm gonna jump a little bit into this like quadrant. This is where my German comes through. I actually don't think I've ever said that word out loud, but here we are. If I said it wrong, I can read it. But this is really what we're looking at. So you kind of have these 4 buckets. You have like your strategic initiatives. For me, for example, a strategic initiative was our previous company was preparing for Google deprecating third-party cookies, which for us, which was pretty impactful because we were a marketing company. So we ran ads, which, you know, we cookie you to follow you around the internet everywhere and show you ads so you buy things. So for us, this was like a pretty detrimental, like technical challenge, huge overhaul of our infrastructure. So huge strategic initiatives, significant impact on the company, but also like takes a lot of time and cycles for it to be successful. So really lengthy project. We kind of have your home runs. Those I would like really classify as like they're really like high yield, like pretty high likelihood of success, not like crazy amount of time in terms of like overhead. So those are like kind of like quick wins with like a high impact on the company. So for me, for example, this was more on the product team. We did like just a really small overhaul of Jira that ended up saving our like product and engineering team a ton of time, but it was only like a 2-week project. So that for me was like a home run. Made me feel good, huge impact, really fast. Then there's the stuff you shouldn't be doing, either because it has a low likelihood of success or it's just not as important. Like, you know, sometimes I think we agree to meet with people we shouldn't be meeting with. I feel like as a chief of staff, I was like everyone's therapist and coach and I don't know, a lot of these different things where I was like, wow, I'm spending a lot of time in one-on-ones just being people's like listener. And on one hand, I think it was like really great to be that person to people, but it also started really draining me. And I think when I started taking a look at how much time I actually just spend on being people like, I don't know, resource slash therapist slash coach, I was like, I have to find a better balance of applying this and not just being the go-to to people that they complain to. And then you kind of have your housekeeping tasks. So for housekeeping tasks, they can be like low value, but like high likelihood of success or seem kind of like low value. This, I think, like kind of depends on how you're perceiving it. And maybe some of the things you'll see in my list, you'll be like, wait, why would this like be low value? And I'll speak to it a little bit. But these are kind of the quadrants. And then again, it's kind of connected to how impactful is it for the company and what's the likelihood of success. Does that generally make sense? Any questions? No. So for example, for strategic initiatives, obviously right now we're raising our first round of funding. Fortunately, we're really close, but it was also like, feels like the longest 3 months of my life trying to close a pre-seed round. But that's a big, obviously strategic initiatives. That's honestly where I spend a huge amount of my time. But then we're also doing things like finalizing our 2024 product roadmap and hiring plans. And we're revisiting our go-to-market and pricing structure right now based on like early betas we've been running. So those are really the things that require strategic thinking, a lot of time, have like a really high impact on the business. There will be some experimentation, like trial and error. It usually impacts the whole company, except fundraising, kind of in my own hole with that one. But that's really like, again, strategic initiatives that I'm really spending my time on. As you can see, I spend around 30% of time on that, which might seem weird because I just said I spend most of my time fundraising. But I kind of broke this out a little bit into what are the things in fundraising I'm doing that are actually strategic versus I shouldn't be doing them, or they're really just housekeeping. For home runs, my co-founder was on her honeymoon for 3 weeks, which is also why I'm extra tired right now, because she's a very important balancer for me. But I was basically taking over some stuff of her, including things like QAing new product features. A really good thing actually is we're using Joyn for Joyn. So I'm using my own product right now to reduce the overhead we have operationally. So I'm actually constantly QAing the product features. But that to me is like a home run because I get a feel for the product. I emphasize with the customers and the pain point. I'm not losing touch with it. That's like really high value for me, like really working with customers every day and talking to them. Like that's the thing that I think is incredibly important. And customer acquisition as well, which that's usually my job when I'm not fundraising. As you can see right now, and I have a lot of cycles on my home runs, which is sad. And that's definitely an area, right, that if I think about the year ahead, I really want to spend way more time with customers. Like that's really what I want to get back to with us closing the round. That's really a big focus for me. So having more home runs. And then the two buckets that I think are the big ones where it's more like, how do I look at this and what are things that I can do to revisit it? Either by saying, I'm no longer doing this completely. And that's a kind of like an assessment of like, what happens if you stop doing this? Because certain things obviously just can't stop doing. But in certain things I do just because I'm used to doing them and maybe they're not even value driving. Maybe they're a little bit more of things that I'm an anxious person and I like a sense of control. So there might also be things that it's just like, can I just let this go and know the company is not going to fall apart if I don't do this anymore? There's certain things that can be delegated. And delegation, I know with a chief of staff, not everyone has a team reporting to them. Some people do have a team reporting to them. I had a team reporting to me. I managed our operations team, but I also started delegating work to people in the organization. Like when I was working on product related stuff, I try to find people that wanted to advance in the company, like get to the next stage of promotion, had to demonstrate leadership skills, that I technically really ended up making the project owner. So instead of me necessarily owning the whole project end to end, I was delegating some work to people I knew would be in a good position to do this. But for me, for example, it's like some things right now, like 83Bs for the IRS that have to be filed with like early equity. It's literally the bane of my existence. I just constantly email people, have you filed this yet? Can you send me the like proof of filing it? And I think we have a lot of work like this where it's just like checking in with people. Have you done this yet? Can you send this yet? And you have like reminders in your calendar to remind them again and again and again and again. And that's definitely stuff where I'm like, I really shouldn't be doing this. Like I shouldn't be running around reminding people of the 83B. I could technically delegate this to my law firm. The trade-off for me would be I would pay my law firm, which as a startup is like, do I want to pay my law firm? The answer is probably no, because the hourly rates are ridiculous. There's other things I could consider, right? Do I bring in an EA or do I bring in somebody else in some capacity that can take over some of this operational overhead from me? Like those are things that I can think about, which then goes into, it's kind of like cost benefit analysis, right? Like, how much time am I gaining back? And actually, Kendra, my co-founder, is great because she always forces me. I was like assessing law firms and I'm really diligent, like too diligent, which I think is a German in me. Spend way too much time on these law firms. And Kendra was like, you know what the cost is of you spending 5 hours, like just looking at law firms and going back? It's not worth it. And like, just pick them. I know you already have a gut feeling about someone. If you use Fenwick or Cooley, they're both great law firms. Just do it, right? So she's like a good like check for me to be like, you're wasting your time. You're like going way too deep on these things. And if the law firm doesn't work out, we can fire them. We can use somebody else. It's not the end of the world. So I think that's like a great way to look at some of these things in terms of the stuff you shouldn't be doing, delegation, outsourcing, just dropping things. But it's also, again, a great one to show to an executive if it's something that you're doing, you shouldn't be doing, but you have to do. So you can be like, hey, actually, I spend so much time on this thing I shouldn't be doing. It takes up X, Y, and Z hours every week, which then helps them, right, get the visibility they need to maybe work with you on like reprioritizing where you're spending your time. And that's what I did a lot with my CTO, because he was like, I just met him earlier this year again, and we talked about OKR planning, which, good Lord, that was like the bane of my existence, doing OKR planning at the company. I had to force everyone into Asana. It was like a total disaster, but not for him. He was like, man, it was like so smooth when we ran OKR planning at previous company. At this company I'm at now, it's such a mess. And I literally in Miro, I sketched out before for my co-founder, like the steps I had to do for OKR planning. And it took me 5 hours to sketch out. And I was like, this is the stuff that he didn't feel, right? Because I was the buffer. I was taking care of things, making it seem like it's running smoothly, but he didn't know all the stuff that like went into actually making it happen. And this kind of gave me an opportunity to show him, hey, actually for OKR planning is all the things I'm doing that I don't think I should be doing. And then we had a conversation of, okay, does this mean we need somebody like a dedicated project manager? Is this something you can outsource to your team? Is this something that we can automate through bringing on something like Zapier or now Joyn? Those were like kind of the conversations we were able to have. And then for housekeeping, I know maybe team meetings, one-on-ones feel like, wait, they're low value. And it's, for me, again, there are things that I have to be doing. I don't necessarily think they're like always low value. I think it's important to build relationships. But in certain weeks, let's say I have 30 investor meetings and I'm diligent with 10 funds, maybe in that moment, I'm going to skip a team meeting because I have to close out my fundraising round, right? So these are more the things where they may be lower in value. So maybe it's more like a trade-off discussion of like, hey, if I maybe skip this team meeting today or cancel my one-on-ones today, that means I can focus on closing my pre-seed round. And that's okay. You know, you might not do it forever, but maybe you're doing it for like a week or so. So that's really how I like to think about that new bucket. And these are also things that I look at with Kendra. Like, for example, we have to get a new CPA because our tax stuff is more complicated. For some reason, it's like a total nightmare to find a CPA that does what we need to do. So now basically Kendra's back. So she's like, I'm going to take this over. So we're also talking about some of the housekeeping stuff we have to do for the business. What are the things that I can do versus she can do depending on our workload, right? Because in some weeks, Kendra is like drowning and then she can come to me and be like, hey, I know we need to do X, Y, and Z with this tax person, but I'm like drowning in contracts, right? So we use this as a way of conversations with each other as well. That's a lot of like common chat stuff, but that's basically like my high level. But as you can see, even for me as like the CEO of the company, I should actually spend most of my time in strategic initiatives. I should probably get that like to a good like 60 and then spend more time on home runs. But as you can, I spent most of my time in stuff you shouldn't be doing in housekeeping. And it's like wild. That's why I constantly Kendra, I'm like, when can Joyn do this thing so I don't have to do it anymore? So we have a lot of these conversations. She's like, I'm not building the product for you. And I was like, fine. I know you're not, but also here's my product feedback. She's like, Larissa, not a paying customer, I'm just using Joyn. But yeah, anyway, I'm going to pause for a second for questions. Check the chat too.
No questions in the chat that I see, mostly just responding to a lot of the things that you were talking about, and being a therapist. I think that was a big one. And things like that there. But yes, if you have questions so far about what Larissa has talked about, please feel free to use the raise hand button or come off mute. We'd be happy to field your questions.
And if not,
Do you share this with your team? Do they get to see what's on your plate?
So I did this at my previous company. Like I shared this pretty broadly because again, I had my own operations team. My whole team used this as well. So it helped actually give them visibility to me on what was going on their plate, which was really helpful. Within the company now, I actually just did this again for this, like, wow, I actually should bring this back because and Kendra came back yesterday from her honeymoon and I immediately pulled this up and I was like, look at this, Kendra. So I think it's something now for us that we want to more broadly start using with the team to create that visibility. Because yeah, I think similarly, especially for me, I'm on a little bit of an island, and I think chiefs of staff actually feel like that quite a bit too. Like they're kind of like on this island, like chugging along, doing the thing. So it's a great way to use visibility. But at my previous company, the people I managed used it, and then I also shared mine with them to give them visibility and helped us have really good like kind of conversations of like, are we spending our time on the right things? Also as like an operations team as a whole. Oh. I'm going to drop this Google Doc in here, which you should be able to make a copy of, but let me know if you can. But obviously just click on file and make a copy. I actually don't use Google Docs anymore. I only use Notion. I literally was in Google Docs. I was like, I don't even know how to do this anymore. It's so funny how quickly we get used to technology. It's wild. But I was like, I don't want to force people into Notion if they're not using Notion. So like good old Google Doc. But again, just click on file, make a copy. And that should, if you don't see it, let me know, but it should work. Yes, Notion changed my life. Try to force my company into Notion, my previous one. The answer was no, but we would have had a good life if we would have moved everyone to Notion. Anyway, it's hard to make people switch the tools that they're used to. But yeah, again, make a copy, and I think we're just gonna spend like 15 minutes on you just working kind of on your own time on the matrix. You can stay on video, you can turn it off, and then we'll just circle back in like 15. People can share some of their takeaways, and we'll just do some Q&A if there's any other questions. But I think I'm just like going a little bit of our own moment right now for 15 minutes and just do this thing. And if you have questions in the meantime, feel free to like just raise your hand or DM me.
I can go ahead and share. Hi, my name is Sophie. I'm aspiring, but kind of in a parallel position, supporting our CEO at a Series A startup in climate tech. And so, something I realized while doing this prioritization is that a lot of the housekeeping things that I've taken off my CEO's plate have then just like flooded my own housekeeping time spent, which is part of like my own housekeeping then. But that was really interesting because it just does take a ton of time. But I guess like the next phase of questions would be like, how does that evolve over to the stuff you shouldn't be doing side where like there's less impact?
Yeah. And I think for housekeeping, again, like I think the distinction between like stuff you shouldn't be doing in housekeeping is with housekeeping, it is technically something you could deprioritize in something that's like more strategic as well. While I think with stuff you should be doing is just stuff, maybe I should be doing this because it's just taking up like too much time. But I would also say I think if your housekeeping like blows out of proportion, that's always where it's like a good time to maybe have a conversation with the CEO of, hey, because I don't know whether right you have this trade-off right now, but hey, because I spend all this time on X, Y, and Z task, I actually don't get to have a lot of time on X, Y, and Z strategic financial plan that we have to work on. So it kind of still helps like kind of create the visibility on like where you're spending your time with your CEO as well.
Thank you. That was super helpful.
I also say I'm like a sucker for some of the housekeeping stuff because I like to tick things off my box. So like sometimes I'm always like, I'm like an inbox zero kind of person. Like my day, I start with I have to get my inbox to zero, and I hate notifications anywhere. But every now and then I also question myself of like, is this really how I should spend my time? But now I try to kind of structure my day of, okay, then I set aside this hour just to get this like mental space and satisfaction in the morning, and then block off time for I'm a morning person, which was really important for me to say, but I block off time for then strategic work. And then the afternoon is meeting. And then I have like an hour in the evening where I like, again, go back to my housekeeping, like email follow-ups and stuff like that. So I think it can also kind of help you think about, how do I make more time for strategic work? When is the best time? Can I block this off? And then also setting maybe, your hour of like, this makes me feel good housekeeping aside as well, but not, because I think I sometimes just do housekeeping because it's easy rather than doing the things I might be procrastinating. So I think that's also something that's like something I have to keep track of because I like to check things off my list person. Yes, to Monica's comment, that's exactly me. And I do need some gratification of just feeling like I'm making progress because I sometimes get to like like revisiting our pitch deck, for example. I don't know what it is about building decks. It's just something that takes way too much time. I'm also like obnoxious with formatting. Everything has to be perfect. So I don't get a lot of gratification from building a pitch deck. So then I need sometimes just this like, oh, now I'm going to go to like my housekeeping and bang out these like 10 email follow-ups, and I'm feeling good about myself. So I think in a way can also create balance on when we feel like stuck or procrastinating, just to get this like boost of productivity and the feeling of productivity. So that's definitely, I function like that for sure. The other thing that really helped me too is like, because as a chief of staff, for sure, I had a lot of one-on-ones, like I mentioned. I actually ended up really looking at how many hours do I spend in one-on-ones. And for me, it like really blew out of proportion, where I think I had like good like 20 to like 25 hours every single week just in one-on-one meetings. Where I was like, maybe maybe I need to somehow rejigger this and like change my cadence with people, for example. But also, again, relationships are so critical to being successful as a chief of staff. So it's obviously around finding the right balance. But I think for me, also understanding if I spend this amount of time in my one-on-ones, what's the impact on me? And for me, it was more I actually got emotionally really burned out because I was everyone's go-to for their problems. That I was like, I'm just starting to get like tapped out because and this is more a reflection of my organization that I was at previously, but I was kind of the sandwich between executives are unhappy because people aren't doing the things they think they should be doing, and employees feel unhappy because like they are like blocked or things are messy or they don't understand why they're doing what they're doing, and both were complaining to me. And like in some sense, I was like, there's just certain things that I didn't have power over, like certain executives, I couldn't change their mind of like doing something. So like for me, having that context on what are the things that make me feel empowered or powerless in my role, and how do I shift that balance successfully? That's also something like I kind of asked myself kind of follow-up questions with the prioritization matrix on like more broadly, how does this affect my happiness and success in the role? And does it also help me get to the next step in my career, whatever that may be? Because for a chief of staff, obviously it can be like a lot of different things. So like also ask yourself some follow-up questions on like, if you see your different buckets, do you think it aligns with what makes you happy and what sets you up for success in terms of your career and like career development? And using it also as a conversation for if you have your career conversation with your exec, I think that's like a good framework to work as well. I'm going to touch on the CEO questions of like the people that kind of want to do it all instead of letting things go, and what's a good way to like help them maybe let go of some of these things. Cause my CTO was like that, like he, especially in like certain areas. So I think like one, asking them how impactful is this for the company, right? Tying it back to how impactful is this really? How is the impact impacted by them doing it versus someone else? I would always ask them, why is it so hard for you to let go of this? From my CTO, that was one, the comment of, it'll be faster if I just do it myself, which is like, okay. And I know I fall into this trap too sometimes, like, oh, it's easier to just do it myself rather than delegating it. But then I would have a conversation around, okay, how much time are you spending on it? How much time would it take someone else to ramp on it? And then what's the longer term gain if you get X hours back to spend on, for example, a strategic initiative instead of X, Y, and Z? The other thing was more around I'm the expert of this, so people naturally just come to me. So it makes sense for me to keep doing this. I would hate this because I was always like, are you saying you'll be at this company forever? And like, what's the cost of not transferring knowledge? And we actually had like people with significant tenure. I was one of them. And whenever the knowledge just sat in their brains, the impact on the company was actually really tough. And then I would usually work with them on like, how do we get the person ramped, and how are you comfortable with them getting there, for example? So again, it's like kind of a lot of follow-up questions and kind of understanding their why and like motivations. And then also, is this like a final thing? Like as in, is this like, for example, I was talking about the law firms I was like looking at, right? It was like, in my head, I was like, okay, law firm, it's associated with cost. We don't want to like hire the wrong law firm and hire a new law firm, and they have to fix all the things, and we're going to pay all the things. And we were in between Fenwick, which is a super expensive law firm, and a really good law firm that's like cheaper. And I was like, it is a big financial decision that we're making. So I got really bogged down on this because I'm really risk averse with like finances, also for the company. I want to be like really conscious of how we're spending money. So I kind of found myself, and then again, Kendra's question was, right, is this final? Is this something we can never come back from? And the clear answer is no, like we can revert from this. So I think, again, understanding your motivation and why, and like, is it, because speed, expertise, or it feels like this final thing, or whatever it is, like understanding that and then asking more questions and then working with them on a plan that they're comfortable with on maybe transitioning it out of the work is like, is something that I've worked with on my CTO. So yeah, he was like this. In terms of success of the role and lessons that I've learned, honestly, this was a huge conversation with previous company. We had multiple chiefs of staffs at the company. We had, I think, 4 or 5 at some point. So we had a lot of them. And it was really interesting because I think our roles and our success varied depending on who our executives were and like what we were aligned to. I think for me, it was like understanding how I define success for myself was one part of it. But and it had to do with, obviously, I ran a lot of like high impact like revenue initiatives. So yes, that was like a very tangible way of, right, are we executing on the initiative? Am I like successfully unblocking people and like moving things forward? For me, that also had like more things underlying to that though, which is like a little bit less measurable. But like, because relationships are so important, like building trust is really critical. So for me, a success was that somebody trusted me and like leaned in and like really moved the needle on this thing with me. But yeah, the measuring success, I think it was a huge conversation because again, it sometimes feels more intangible. And then oftentimes the chief of staff leaves the company and everything falls apart because again, it is a little bit of this, you're making sure things happen in the background. Not all of it is visible, right? People kind of take it for granted pretty easily that the chief of staff is moving things along. And sometimes the impact is only felt in the absence of. So I think, one, define your own success and then also work with the executive on what success looks like and create the visibility of like what really goes into your role to move things along. I think that's really important. And kind of with my ops team, how I spend a lot of time with them defining their success. Because actually with my ops team, unfortunately, we went through 4 layoffs since the pandemic. Every single time I had to justify their headcount because it was much harder to quantify the impact of, oh, they make sure products get delivered on time. Whatever, PMs just need to get better project managers. Reality is not everyone's a good operator, and our PMs weren't trained operators. That's why we had my ops team that helped them take it off their plate and make sure things move along. Harder to quantify. So I like was constantly finding myself in a conversation of that. And I think having the visibility of how they spent their time and like making it kind of quantifiable of like, if we're removing this person, this will land on X, Y, and Z's plate, and they won't be able to do X, Y, and Z anymore. And technically, you want your PMs to talk to customers, not to chase the marketing team down to like update the copy. So yeah, it's a tough one. I don't know what I'm an expert on measurable success of chief of staff because I think it can be like pretty nuanced, but hopefully it's kind of helpful. I don't know. Any other questions or thoughts anyone wants to share in the last 4 minutes?
Would you say that the relationship with your principal is more important than the industry or even product for you?
I think so. And I also would say for me, it was also the extended leadership team, like really the relationship with any kind of like stakeholder. And I think that's, again, like relationship building was like the most important thing, like bottom up and like top down. But I do think the relationship and how they set you up for success is extremely important. I had different principles. One had all these ambitions, but held no one accountable. And I was like losing my mind. I was like working 9 months on this project. Nobody adopted things. And I was like, oh. And then I moved to somebody that actually just like people followed. And I was like, he held them accountable. He's like, this is important to the business. No way around it. So people started adopting it. So immediately my happiness was like pretty different, right? So yeah, I would say the relationship and how they set you up for success and how they understand the chief of staff role and how they make sure you're set up for success with the rest of the organization is very important to be successful. Cool.
Well, we are right here at the top of the hour. So a huge thank you to Larissa for sharing this prioritization matrix with us, as well as your experience as a chief of staff. And I love always hearing about how that chief of staff role has translated into the things that you've done after as well. So we'll follow up with everybody. If you didn't get the link or you lost the link, we'll share it again with everyone here. And we'll also share a little bit more about Joyn if you want to check that out. Sounds like this prioritization matrix is being built in mind with this product as well. So thank you again, Larissa, for joining us today. How can people get in touch with you if they're interested in chatting with you further or learning more about Joyn?
You can obviously always find me on LinkedIn or just send me an email. Ooh, look at that capitalization. But there's only me with this name, I think. So you should be able to find me on LinkedIn. Even though as an imposter, she has a U at the end of the Licha, and I'm like, dang, we're too close. We need to get her off of LinkedIn. No, I'm just kidding. But definitely find me on LinkedIn or send me an email. I'm always happy to like chat further as well about anything or just be somebody to chat with. I still talk to my team, even though I've left the company over a year ago. Like I still talk to my prior team pretty frequently of all the stuff they're dealing with. Ops is a really tough role, y'all. They're doing amazing work, and companies would be way worse off without y'all. So I appreciate you a lot.
We also strongly believe that, of course, and that's why we're all here. So amazing. Well, I hope everybody has a wonderful rest of your week here. Happy belated New Year to everyone. This was our first workshop of the new year here. So thanks, Larissa, for kicking us off. And we will see you all in Slack. All right. Bye, everyone.